I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. "1716 Loudon Avenue, Northwest, Roanoke, Virginia, 24017. Now that address might not mean much to you, but trust me, it means something to the Sangola family. And what it means is that they belong somewhere. All 13, as Eric said, yes, 13 of them, mom, dad, 11 kids. It means that the Sangalas, that after running away from war in Africa and years spent in refugee camps in Congo, where there was no education, little access to food and clean water for their children, and after a years-long process to become legal immigrants in this country, during which they had no time of their own, they can now go to 1716 Loudon Avenue. And they can walk up the steps, they can stand on the front porch, and they can know that the house that's being built there is for them. It's their house, and they belong there. What a wonderful feeling it is, right? To feel like you truly belong. I mean, no matter who we are or where we are from or what we have or whatever our story is in our life, we all want to feel like we belong to something or belong to someone. I mean, it's a very deep part of our human nature, that desire to be a part of something beyond just ourselves. Well, in our gospel story today, Jesus certainly has something to say about belonging. It's a late December day in Jerusalem, and Jesus is walking through Solomon's porch, or portico, as it's called. And it was a very old, very revered part of the temple, which was also called the Porch of Judgment, because it was from that place that the king would make his judgments and exercise justice for those people who were brought before him. So Jesus is walking along that day, and as usual, he is drawing a big crowd. And this time, the people that gather around him, there are devout Jews that have come to Jerusalem to celebrate what's called the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah, as we know it today. Now, obviously, all these people gathered around Jesus, they had seen him. They had heard the things that he was saying and teaching. They had seen the miracles he had done, or signs, as John called them. And all of these things combined had evoked a lot of discussion among the group about the identity and the origins and the authority of Jesus, which had resulted then in a lot of divisions among the people. I mean, some of them thought that he could actually be the Messiah. I mean, how else could he open the eyes of the blind, they wonder? Something that he had just recently done. And others believed that maybe, he's just some demon-possessed crazy guy. Others thought he was a blasphemer, deserved to die. It seemed like as much as they knew about Jesus and had seen him and heard him, they still just didn't quite get him. They still didn't know what this elusive storytelling, who this elusive storytelling rabbi really is. But they did know what they want. They wanted so much to put an end to the debate. How long are you going to keep us in suspense? They say to Jesus. If you are the Messiah, then just tell us plainly. Just get it out there. Say it. It's obvious that for once and for all, they want to know. The problem, of course, is that regardless of what Jesus says or does, regardless of what he tries to teach them or show them, the debate never seems to end. I mean, it never ends, right? Not even to this day. And so Jesus, he responds with what could have only been a very weary voice. He says, I've told you. And yet you do not believe. then he follows that up with a really biting clincher. He says, you do not believe because you do not belong to my sheep. Now, whenever I read this story, it's that last comment there that I often struggle with the most. You do not believe, he says, because you do not belong to my sheep. Now, I can't help but wonder, what exactly does Jesus mean by that? Because it doesn't sound very good, does it? Does that mean that only certain people belong to Jesus because they are the ones, and only those people then are the true believers? Because, again, that doesn't sound very good. And I suppose the easy way out of this would be for all of us here to just assume that this sentence doesn't apply to us, right? After all, we are believers. We're here this morning worshiping. We know our Bible, kind of, We love the liturgy. We say our prayers. We know what to bring to a potluck, right? We got a St. John's magnet on our car, maybe. We give a good effort at doing the stuff that Jesus tells us to do. So surely we believe, surely we belong, except for, all the times when we don't. The nagging trouble with Jesus' indictment is that all too often it actually does apply to us in our faith lives. My guess, and I'll make assumption here, is that we all doubt, right? We do. We all question God's goodness, question his power, and even his existence more than we would ever want to maybe admit even. And we know this because the question that those people put to Jesus that day in the temple, it hits a very raw nerve for us, doesn't it? And it exposes in us all kinds of yearning and pain. All too often, we find ourselves asking and maybe even begging Jesus to just speak plainly, right? To just speak plainly into the circumstances of our lives. All too often, we do feel as if God is keeping us in suspense, if he's maybe hurting us with his silence. All too often we start our prayers or maybe our thoughts with the words of the people who approached him on that day in December long ago. If you are good, Jesus, if you are powerful, if you're loving, if you really care, if you are the Messiah, then stop talking into my life in riddles. Stop hiding from me. I long for your presence. Stop leaving my prayers unanswered. Stop leaving me in hurt and in pain. Stop awakening in me these holy hungers that then you won't satisfy. Stop not explaining to me the things in my life that seem to really just make no sense at all. Show up, Jesus. Speak decisively. Speak plainly. And take this world of swirling, uncomfortable, uncertain gray and turn it once and for all into a world of black and white for us. Now, we can't know for sure what the motivations of those people listening to Jesus on Solomon's porch were that day, but we can know our own. When we ask Jesus to stop keeping us in suspense, to just tell us something plainly, to just show us what we want to see or do what we want him to do, let's be honest, what we're really saying is that we are struggling, right? We're struggling somewhat to trust him, to trust the things he says. We doubt our own ability to trust his voice and to understand. Jesus is supposed to be our good shepherd. He is. We're supposed to know and love and hear his voice, but so often we don't. And so maybe this biting response from Jesus applies to us more than we actually think. Now, at first glance, that reply from Jesus of those questioning that day might appear to suggest in some way that belonging to Jesus depends on believing in him. And if that's so, well then, like I said, we're in trouble because that's a hard thing for people who struggle with their believing. But in fact, what Jesus is saying to us this morning, and the same thing to those people that day, he's saying the exact opposite. He's saying you struggle to believe, he says, because you don't recognize and accept that you already belong. In other words, belief doesn't come first. It can't come first. Belonging comes first. And that right there, now I know it's just one little sentence, but that right there is both our hope and our consolation as followers of Jesus. And if you remember nothing else from this sermon, I know you remember everything else, but if you remember nothing else, I want you to just remember that one line this morning. For Jesus, belief doesn't lead to belonging. Belonging leads to belief. And so the good news is that we already belong to him. We were created by God in his image. We were made his own in baptism. There are so many people today that are going to try and tell us that our status before God, it depends on how we feel. Our status before God, it depends on what we think or what we accomplish, or it depends on being free of doubt or having just the right religious experience, believing the correct doctrine, or doing the perfect liturgy, or having this high level of maturity and knowledge, but that just isn't the case. Remember, Jesus doesn't count and keep score the same way the world does. And so the only thing that matters, the only thing that our status before God depends on, is that we are known by the shepherd who claims us as his own. And that's exactly what our shepherd has done. Shepherd, caring for his sheep. He claims us, cares for us, watches over us. So the next question is that, so if we already belong, then what does it look like to believe? And why is it even important? Well, it's important because believing is how we live out our belonging. Again, belonging leads to belief. It's the reason we baptize babies, because as we know that as they grow with the help of the rest of the flock, they will grow into their baptism and what it means for them. It's why when a small child comes up for communion to the table and stretches out their hand, I'm not worried about how old they are. I put a communion wafer in it, knowing that like baptism, they don't have to understand what's happening to reap the benefits of it. And knowing that the sign of belonging at the table will help them grow into the belief as they grow older and understand. And so in the same way, once we know we belong, then how we live out our beliefs is how we grow into that belonging to the shepherd. And what we're reminded of today is that belief comes through the daily business of just belonging to the flock. It comes from walking in the footsteps of the shepherd, really. Doing what he does, living as he asks us to live. It comes from being in the company of our fellow sheep and listening to the voice of the one who calls us and reminds us both who we are and whose we are. And then to think very carefully about what that means for our lives. Which takes me all the way back to 1716 Loudon Avenue. Over the last 3 days, I have crossed paths in some form or fashion with over 50 members of the St. John's community at 1716 Loudon Avenue. So we worked with the homeowners, the Sangala family, to help build that home for them through Habitat for Humanity. I've sweated it out a few days in the scorching sun. I stood in the cold rain a day and nailed bolts literally in puddles of water. I told people that Thomas Bass was in charge, not me, when something went wrong and we messed it up. We had to redo it. He was, by the way, in charge if anything's wrong. I got to see Whitney in Carhartt overalls and a clerical collar. Interesting combination, but good, too. I got to eat good food provided by the fine wines and other families here at the church. I got to laugh. I got to work, to share stories and be together with people, all working towards the same goal. to help a very deserving family feel like they belong somewhere in this world. It was a wonderful 3 days. And I saw all of those 50-plus people, living out their beliefs and in the process showing that they belong. The truth is, Christianity is not a spectator sport. But trust me when I say it can very easily and very quickly become one if we let it. And the most important thing we do, first and foremost, is we come here to worship our shepherd, and to worship and give thanks to the one who provides for us and cares for us, absolutely. But if we come here just on Sunday to watch the show and we never connect in any real, tangible way, what we do here to our lives out there and the ways that we spend our time and our energy serving and helping others, well, then that's exactly what we're doing. We're actually turning Christianity into a spectator sport. And we can so easily, and really, when you think about it, even unintentionally, get so wrapped up in our own lives and in our own routines and to-do lists that it's kind of easy to forget that other people sometimes even exist, right? Especially other people who might be out of our normal way or who might need help in some way. Our time is short and precious, believe me. I know that as well as anyone else, but it does matter. It does matter how we spend the time that we have in our lives. People ask me often, how can I strengthen my faith? How can I find purpose? How can I find meaning? And my answer, it really is always the same, and it's always very simple and direct. Find ways in your life to just help and serve and look out for and care for other people, because we all know that everyone in this world is hurting in some way, shape, or form and needs somebody else to care for them. Whether that's here at St. John's, you know the list. We've got amazing outreach ministries here you could be a part of. It might be at 1716 Loudon Avenue, somewhere else in this community, or halfway around the world in another country. There is no better way to make your faith and your beliefs and your connection to God and to your fellow sheep stronger and more real than that. Because when we follow our shepherd, we live out our lives with the rest of his flock, caring for others. When we follow his path, and we do what he does, and when we take our own time and resources to help and serve others around us, what happens again is that our faith becomes real for us. And as a result, our belonging becomes more clear to us. We feel and we believe what was true all along, that we belong. Amen.